Hello, I'm Maria Hall-Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, OSHA has reported that workplace violence incidents have actually tripled in the last decade. What does that mean? What can we do, and what should we be looking for? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by experts today that can help us with all of those questions. Dr. Maura Kokinda from LA Medical Services, good to see you again, and Dr. Maura Kane, Citywide Threat Assessment Team. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
I think the most important thing to do, first off, is to define workplace violence. I mean, where that line is and what the different types are when you are feeling as if there's some threat within the workplace.
So it's a little bit of a complicated definition when you look at it. Generally, the official definition is a threat or actually any sort of assaultive behavior, but also a series of behaviors can indicate workplace violence. So if you have obviously an assault or a threat of an assault or series of behaviors of inappropriate behavior or harassment, things like that, that constitutes the threat part, but it also has to have a nexus to the workplace.
Okay.
That's expanding a little bit as well with telecommuting. So it just has to be some sort of a threat and a nexus to the workplace. It can't be a personal relationship at home.
Okay, but a workplace violence scenario can actually take place with someone in the workplace from someone outside the workplace. It could be a vendor, or it could be a client, or it could be, that's still considered a workplace violence
It can
scenario.
be a constituent, someone coming to get a permit or anything like that. Yes, it just has to have some sort of a nexus to the workplace.
All right, so when you talk about violence, does it have to be blatant? Does it have to be a physical threat, or can it be an emotional threat or a psychological threat? I mean, does it have to be direct and physical in any sort?
You know, it doesn't. It's actually, like Dr. Kane said, a little complicated. It's broader than you would expect. Because one thing is we want to prevent things before they reach physical violence, and the steps leading up to that, it's more of the psychological or some of the other threats you mentioned.
And what do you call a threat? What's a threat? What is a threat? I'm saying, I don't like your whatever, or is it saying you shouldn't be doing that, or is it I'm going to come get you?
It can be any of those, anything that instills fear. So it can be a direct threat, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to shoot you. It can be an indirect threat, as in, if my boss doesn't do this, I'm gonna hurt him, or he's gonna pay for it, or kind of a veiled where you'll be sorry if you don't give me that promotion, you'll be sorry, where they know they're not really saying a threat, but the hair on the back of your neck stands up because the tone and the demeanor, and maybe there's been a couple months of just behavior that's been a little different, and they say that to you, and you kind of have that, ooh. But they can say, I didn't directly threaten you. Mm-hmm. That still is something that we would get involved in. And like Dr. Kokinda said, we want to get involved at that stage versus someone hit me. We want to because there are signs and there are ways to know when that's kind of starting. So we need to be involved at the beginning versus once something's already happened.
So what are the warning signs? I mean, and not just something that's happening to you directly, but maybe something that you're observing in the workplace that you're seeing. What should we be aware of? What should we see? What should alert us to, as you said, the hair on the back of your neck goes up? What are some of the indicators? Somebody is constantly angry, somebody is always complaining, somebody is, what are some of the things we should be looking for directly and indirectly?
You know, all of those things can be indicators. I think one thing that I've noticed is if someone really stands out from the group, maybe they're complaining more, or maybe they're withdrawing quite a bit. That's another thing that could be concerning, or behavioral changes that are observable where someone's setting themselves apart. Maybe they're more isolative, maybe they're a little more erratic in their behavior.
Yeah, anytime there's a change in behavior, because all of us are different. So we have the people that are withdrawn by nature, or the people that are complainers by nature. But when you see a change in their behavior, so they're withdrawn and now they're loud and they're irritable. And so anytime there's a change in behavior, you want to ask why. I always tell people I'm a giant 2-year-old. I'm always asking why, right? Like something is different. Why? Something changed. Why? Is it that he had a great career and a marriage and now he's getting a divorce. Something is different. So if you see something that's different or something that just strikes you as odd, that's when you want to say something. There's not a, if this person does A, B, and C, call, because everybody's different and every situation is different. So if you just see a change in behavior, then what's normal?
So what exactly is the citywide threat assessment team?
So the citywide threat assessment team kind of came out back in 1995 due to the shooting at Piper Tech, where we lost 2 employees from another employee. And so the city council created this team where it's a representative from different arms. So we have our LAPD threat management unit, we have a detective from there, our LAPD security services, medical services division, which is where myself and Dr. Kokinda are from. We have personnel who kind of oversees the team, and then we have our city attorney's office. So we have a representative from each one, and when we get a case, we triage it, and then we kind of decide which arm of CTAD is going to kind of take the general direction of it, and then we support each other throughout it and are constantly kind of roundtabling and talking and discussing, because when you do a threat assessment, you don't want just one pair of eyes. You want everybody to kind of look at it and look at it through their lens and get a full picture.
So from the psychological standpoint, because that's obviously your areas of expertise, what will really sound alarms when you get a case? What are some of the things that you talk about change in behavior, but change in behavior could be just because someone's going through something tragic, and obviously we all do that on a consistent basis, in particular in this last year and a half. So what is it that stands out to either of you when you're observing and looking at something that's come into the office?
Do you want me to take that one?
Go for it.
I love that question.
Okay.
Because there's so much, and there are some things where we've gotten it where I'm like, oh, this something is different here, and it's usually, hey, this person's been a great employee and lately they're showing up late to work, and then once we get the case and we start to look at it and we realize wife passed away 6 months ago, they're going to lose their house, kids aren't talking to them, we start kind of looking into what's going on around them, and we realize that they don't really have any supportive factors. There's nobody there that we know we could call and say, hey, if this is someone's really in need, would you be able to help them? And they don't have that. So that's troubling to me when I look at that. Whereas I feel better if someone has, they may be going through a divorce, but they're strong relationship with their kids or their parents are involved. They've got something. So when I see that they're kind of on their own and there's nothing really holding them up is when I get concerned.
Do you notice that workplace violence scenarios are not necessarily specific, or the causality is not because of something that's happened at the workplace, that it's something else in the person's life that then manifests itself in the workplace? Or do workplace violence incidents happen directly because of something that's happened in the workplace?
It can be a little bit of both. So there's what we call a grievance. So when someone has a grievance, something, that's what kind of started the ball rolling. And the grievance could be something very simple of they didn't get a promotion or they didn't get a raise or they didn't get the schedule they wanted. But that coupled with personal issues is where it kind of gets jumbled up as workplace.
Okay.
When you have something that there's other stuff going on. But it's rare to have it just be my life is completely perfect and one bad thing happened at work and now there's going to be a workplace violence.
But there's also, we're human, so there's going to be, cases where you disagree with somebody at the office, and it might get heated, and it might even seem silly. It might even seem that happens too, doesn't it?
Definitely. And that's one of the reasons why we encourage people, if something's making them uncomfortable or, some dynamics seem to be off, speak up, because then we can come in, we can evaluate, get another set of eyes on what's going on and see if it's just a typical disagreement or situation that's going to blow over, or if it's something that brings a little more concern.
Well, speaking of concern, one of the reasons that we're talking today is it seems, and I mentioned it earlier, there's an escalation, or at least an awareness of an escalation. And these things are happening, like what happened up in Northern California at the union meeting. And then even what happened recently with the fire department in Agua Dulce. What I have heard, and believe me, I am very limited in my understanding, that was an argument over food in the refrigerator, leftover food in the refrigerator. There was these little petty things that somehow turned into this nightmare scenario. Do you
Yeah.
feel as if these things are escalating, that there are more of these cases, or we're just learning more about it?
I think this has been going on for years and years and years, and we kind of cycle through when we become aware of it, but there's not so much an escalation as that we're just learning about them more, and they're a little bit more visible. But they've been there. They've been there since 95 from LA, since 98 in Riverside. I mean, they've been happening. Unfortunately, it's just they happen, we pay attention to them, and then we pretend like they didn't happen, and then they happen again, and we pay attention to them. So it's not an escalation as much as it is just
An awareness.
an awareness.
All right. So we're in the workplace. We feel as if something is awry. What's the process? What's the process of when do I report? When do I reach out to a supervisor? When do I keep my mouth shut? And when do I start to get very worried?
I'm on the belief of I would always say something sooner rather than later. My theory is you never want to not say something and then wake up the next day and have had something happen and go, oh, I wish I would have said something. So the minute you have a concern, you can go directly to your supervisor. If your supervisor is the concern, you can go, one up, because that can be the case sometimes. So there's your supervisor, and then every department in the city of Los Angeles have a workplace violence coordinator, which sits with their HR department. So their responsibility as a workplace violence coordinator is to bring the case to CTAT. So you can report to your supervisor, or you can go straight to your workplace violence coordinator, and then the workplace violence coordinator will get a little bit more information for us and then submit it to CTAT, and we will take it from there. But it's always better sooner rather than later if you feel something's a little off.
What responsibilities do employers have to protect their employees? I mean, where's the line in the sand there that, if they don't know, they can't help, or if they did know, they should have been responsible? Where's that happen?
It's blurring a lot, especially with telecommuting and working from home. So
Really?
there's been a lot of blurring with that of what are our responsibilities if something's happening in the home, which is technically your work site at the moment. And so there's a lot of research going on about that right now. There's an association that everybody in CTAT is actually a member of. It's called the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. It's a national organization with chapters, and our detective with threat management unit is the president of the LA chapter right now. And so that organization is constantly doing research and working. We have a lot of FBI members in the organization and doing research, and one of the things that they are starting to expand on is the role of the employer and what do we need to do and what are our responsibilities, because it's expanding and blurring a little bit. It's not a straight line anymore.
Do you find that there are more reports of things that are not threatening, or more reports of things that are threatening? I mean, what's the ratio of this is a problem versus this is on the cusp of being really scary?
Well, I think one thing is there's a lot of people who are uncomfortable in the workplace, and that's something, like we mentioned before, that there can be early intervention. So I don't know exactly what all would have turned into a threat, but luckily we've been able to be quite preventative in the reports we've been receiving. Even with the first line supervisors, a lot of them have been great in helping to mitigate some of the concerns by making small changes, just giving people some space, maybe if that's what they need, or just looking at how the office is running. So as far as things reaching a legitimate high level threat, we've been lucky so far, but I attribute a lot of that to early intervention.
Yeah, it's hard with the threat assessment because you'll never know if it worked or not, because if it worked, there's nothing to
happened.
quantify it with. So
Well, you have a personal experience. We were talking about this earlier, and actually one of the things that I found a little bit disconcerting, besides the experience itself, which if you're comfortable sharing, great. If you're not, I understand, was lessons were not necessarily learned from that.
Right. So my experience, we talked earlier, was the Riverside City Hall shooting of 1998, where we had a former volunteer, Park and Rec volunteer, that came in and kind of held hostage our council and our mayor and shot. And my mom was on the council at the time and there when it happened. So Riverside is a very open and it's a big, small city is what we would always say. So there wasn't a lot of security. And after that happened, it was very traumatic, I think, for the city and for the country, because in 98, that was a big thing. We put in a lot of security measures. I felt better with my mom going to work, knowing that something like that would hopefully not happen again. Well, when that council went away and all the security measures went away with it. So when I look at our city hall, it looks like it did in 1998, the day before the shooting. And so that I think is really hard, because it's like it happened and we didn't learn from it. And a lot of people will say, oh, that won't ever happen here. And I've heard people say that in Riverside, oh, that won't happen here. But it did. And it didn't impact you, but it impacted, me and hundreds of other family members. I mean, I remember sitting in the emergency room with, the wife of the police officer who they didn't think was going to make it, that kind of stuff. So it's like it did happen, but we do kind of put up our blinders, and that's where it goes back to, is there an escalation, or are we just being aware of it? We're aware of it for a while, and then we kind of get complacent and, oh, it's okay, it won't happen, everything will be fine, and we kind of fall back, and then something happens that reminds us to pick our head up and look around and pay attention. So it's hard when there's not lessons learned.
And even in that case, I mean, he was someone that was that everyone was aware of.
Yes.
And everybody knew, but he wasn't necessarily an employee in the building itself. So how often is that the case, where it's someone that is, as I mentioned earlier, a client or a peripheral person in the workplace, versus someone who shows up on a daily basis and actually is an employee of that particular organization and or governmental office and or business?
I wouldn't have the stats on that. My experience and in the research I've done is it generally tends to be more in the city versus out. Because he wasn't a direct city employee, but he was at one, he was considered, as a full-time volunteer and running a program at a park, he was considered part of the city family. So from my experience and my research of what I've done, it seems to be more prevalent that it's someone that's got more of a tie to the organization versus outside. Outside is when you'll get a domestic violence type situation or something.
An angry
like that.
spouse that's coming to do harm
Mm-hmm.
for something.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of what happens as well? Is that considered workplace violence, or is that something completely separate?
That is considered workplace violence. Unfortunately, in those types of situations, the spouse might not be able to find their partner, so they know where they go to work. So people need to continue to work. They need to make money. They continue to show up, and then the spouse might use the workplace as a place to locate them.
I understand, of all the places, which seem to be somehow a paradox, that healthcare is one of the highest risk industries. Why? I mean, what is it about? Is because it's such a personal interaction between people, or people are disappointed, or what? I just thought that healthcare being something like 60% of
Mm-hmm.
workplace violence incidents happen in the healthcare industry. I thought that was a terrifying statistic.
It's a very emotional industry.
Oh, I see.
It's a very emotional industry. And so there's a lot of, if there's something bad that happens, there's a lot of ways to tie it back to, well, someone didn't do something, or, it's just a very emotionally involved industry. At least that's been my experience with those.
Yes, my husband actually works in healthcare, and they've had some incidents, that bordered high-level concern, and lots of times it'd be involving people who had received very bad news or were on edge waiting for some type of emotional news. So I think Dr. Kane's correct, and that would probably be an contributing factor.
I've also understood, and this is something recently, that somebody who's going to do something dramatic and violent really only does it within a very short period of time of making that decision to do it. That, there's some pretty clear indicators of they bought a bunch of stuff 2 days before they went and did that. Is that true?
It can range. There are some people that will plan a lot longer. Some extravagant ones take a lot longer. I know Riverside, he planned for quite a while, where he showed up at meetings and followed council members to where they, followed their cars. And so he did a lot of planning. But there's this, it's called the pathway to violence that we look at, where it's grievance, and then there's ideation, where they make the decision, and then they move right into research and planning and preparation. And that's usually when you're going to see some signs, is when they start buying stuff or showing up places and kind of doing a dry run so much, which is why we're really big on everybody wearing their badges and things like that, because they'll show up and say, where are the exits? Where do people sit? Can they get through this door? Does anybody stop them? So you'll see that. But that can happen in a very short amount of time, but it can also be, a month or longer of them really, if it's a really hard place for them to get into.
Can you do something that fast? From your perspective, not from theirs, but if you see that dramatic change and you see that behavior, does that kind of really put off some red flags and sirens, and you don't have to do this whole big observational,
Right.
theoretical, multi-departmental. Can you move in quickly in that
Yeah,
regard?
CTAT has that ability to really look at it if it's that concerning, and that's why we need to know, because we don't know what we don't know. We can't see what we can't see. So that's where we need all of the puzzle pieces to kind of come together, and that's every employee sometimes has a different piece of the puzzle, and we need it all to
So
get
you
the
can
big
move
picture.
very quickly if something seems to be, why is that guy always in the why has that guy been in the hallway for the last 2 days, just sort of milling around kind of thing. Okay, so the other part about this is that is it always mental illness, or or how much does mental illness factor into this?
So there was a big study done that looked at the myths of attacks, mostly towards public officials, is really what it looked at. And mental illness actually plays a very, very small part of an incident like this. And when we're talking mental illness, we're talking, actively kind of psychotic, maybe like something along schizophrenia, or and actively, they don't have the ability to kind of put together the plan that needs to be put together to make it happen. There is the other half of mental illness where there could be like a mood disorder and things like that that does play a component, but what you would think of your general mental illness, it's actually very rare.
Okay, and along those lines, even before you have employed someone, even before someone gets a position, are there things that employers should consider beyond the resume and beyond the experience that might be precursors to understanding that a person doesn't have the skill sets to be an employee without any kind of issues? Are there things that we should look at in that way in advance?
It's really challenging, I think, at hiring to know. Personal references can be helpful. However, a lot of times people just don't speak up. If the person made people uncomfortable at a previous place of employment, then that place might be a little too happy to have them move on and move to another work location or another employer. So unfortunately, it's really hard to get that information at the front end. So that's why as things start to show up during the new employment, we really want to hear about it, and we can dig deeper at that time.
Okay, and then along that whole thing, what if I came running in and I was just angry as all get out, and I yelled something very specific and very blatant, saying I was going to harm you? That just might be me being mad.
Mm-hmm.
So is the more blatant is the more blatant usually the less threat, or is it everybody going to go, oh, now I need to worry about her?
It can be again, everybody's different, but most people who are going to follow something through won't be as obvious about it, because then to look. But I don't ever want that black swan kind of what we call, where we miss something. So we want to know about all of that. We want to know about all of it, because it could be that you're just angry, or it could be that you're really going to do something. But I don't ever want the employee to feel like that's their decision to make. That's CTAT's responsibility. I don't ever want to put that on the shoulder of an employee.
So what can you do? Say you have been given a case, and say you now understand that there might be somebody who is on the cusp or has a plan. What can your assessment team do? What is the action you take?
We have a lot.
Oh, that's good.
But I don't know how my.
Well, I'm just
How
all
much
right.
I can
In general,
say about that,
you
yeah.
have some control.
We do, which is why we have somebody from kind of every discipline. We've got city attorneys, the detectives, Dr. Kokinda. We've got somebody where we can, if we need to, step in on whatever discipline or angle that individual might need the support. Because what it comes down to is, how do we stop what's happening from happening, but how do we manage it? 90% of threat assessment is the management of it afterwards. It doesn't just go away. So what services can we provide? What support can we give this individual? What can we put in place to make sure that we manage this for the future and not just the immediate?
Yeah, and some immediate tools CTAT have, security, they can look at different options. The city attorney's office can look at different protective orders, that type of thing. So there are immediate things if there is a threat, but like Dr. Kane said, a lot of the work then happens after that, to continue to maintain the safety and security and everyone feeling comfortable in the workplace.
So in the worst case scenario, and please this never ever ever happen to you or anyone around you, an incident occurs, do you then go in after the fact and kind of fill in a backstory so that you know for next time? Is that part of the responsibilities of your team?
Yes, and that's, we've been in talks with some of the recent things that have happened, and kind of, can we learn from some of this? Because unfortunately when it happens, it's awful, but you also get a little bit of, okay, we missed this, so let's look at this. So it's helpful for us to be able to piece it together, and ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, is great with that, and we share information across the country of what's working, what we missed, just all of that, because information is key.
And is the science getting more advanced, and is the information getting more sophisticated? Because you've been studying this now since the 90s. Is the field growing?
Tremendously. ATAP was a very small organization, years and years and years ago, and it is a national, we actually have an international chapter now, and it's a very big growing we have attorneys, we have social workers, we have FBI, police officers. So it's unfortunate that it's growing, but it's actually a great network for us to learn. And so there's a new journal of threat assessment that's a scientific journal that is out, where we publish papers and do research.
Some of us have been financially, this has been a period of incredible stress, whether you are aware of it or not. So is that one of the reasons to even consider, being very vigilant right now?
Yes, that's something we have a lot of talks about with different departments, different HR, because everyone's on edge, whether you realize it or not. This year has left a mark on everyone, potentially for a variety of reasons. And another thing is people have been socially isolated. So even just coming back to more of a shared space with these changing rules about what's okay, what's not okay, that puts people on edge. So whether people are going to actually be more violent or just be more aware of things that feel uncomfortable, we'll see as it continues to increase, but definitely.
And a polarity of people's opinions about things, depending upon the subject matter. It doesn't seem as if there's been any kind of cohesion over the last X amount of months, if not years. So is that something that could also spur something that would not necessarily have happened even 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, unfortunately, just more disagreements and more, you don't believe this, and just the little arguments. Will it lead to an increase in cases? I'm hoping not. I'm hoping we can work with the city and solve those problems right off the bat.
Okay, so let's end on a really upbeat note. What's the best thing a person can do to diffuse a scenario, even if they need to report it later? But if, what actions can anyone take to just calm things down or diffuse whatever scenario is taking place, whether it be large or small? What would you tell someone in your chair if there's like, I just get all upset, or they just get all upset? What do you do to calm down? What's the best thing to do?
I think one of the best things for de-escalation is to just try to separate, take a timeout. Time is really helpful. So any way someone can figure out how to buy a little time, that's good.
Yeah. Those 3 deep breaths and recompose yourself and walk away will do wonders.
Okay.
And then revisit it.
Well, this is sadly fascinating. And so I really appreciate all of the hard work that you're both doing to keep everyone safe. And I'm sure if somebody has some sort of questions or issues, the first thing they should do is direct them to the HR department, correct?
Yes, so the Workplace Violence Coordinator. And I believe we have a list of Workplace Violence Coordinators up on the personnel website. I will double check that. But yes, every department has a Workplace Violence Coordinator.
All right. Well, everyone stay safe. Thank you for all of your hard work. And we'll talk again soon, maybe about something incredibly upbeat.
That'd be nice.
All right.
Thanks.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.